Hello.
How you doing?
Still here.
All right, I'm going to start the recording. And we are a go.
June 18, 2020 meeting of the Operations and Services Reopening Work Group is being called to order at 5 p.m. These meetings are public meetings to provide transparency and the opportunity for the public to engage in the process. In order to enable every participant to have a voice in the process, public comment will be accepted via email at reopeningideas@doe.k12.de.us or voicemail at 302-735-4244. All comments and ideas will be forwarded to the respective work groups for review and posted on DOE's reopening page on the website as well. Also, for those of you who are viewing via YouTube, the slides that we're going to see tonight are posted on the public meetings website under the documents. In order to get, so you just Google Delaware public meetings, and you can find that public meetings website with our agenda and the and the slides. If you want to know more about what we've been doing, see transcripts of what we've worked on, some of the past documents. You can also go to the DOE reopening website. Go to www.doe.k12.de.us. You'll see a red COVID-19 link. Click on that, and you can see all kinds of stuff that the Department of Education has been working on for, along with our committees dealing with COVID-19. Next slide, please. Brief overview of our agenda. One thing we're going to do is review some of the information. We made modifications in our prior meetings. We'll review some of those, and then we'll come on to discussing the reopening scenarios. We're still on scenario 2, which is moderate spread. We have 2 areas we're discussing today, which is operations and technology, and then we'll do our next steps and adjourn. Next slide, please. I'm one of the co-chairs, Chuck Longfellow from Delaware Department of Education, Associate Secretary for Operations Support. The other co-chairs, Oliver Gums, Cape Henlopen School District Director of Business Operations. And we have a partner from Opportunity Labs Foundation, Andrew Buer, who is also on with us. Next slide. Also, we have various members. I know that some of our legislator members are going to be late tonight because they are in session. So we'll see them when we see them. But let's go down the list as sort of a roll call just to make sure that we know who's here. I know, let's go, and back on the other slide, Oliver, you're here, correct?
Present.
And Andrew, you're here?
I'm here.
Let's go back to the list. Next slide, please. Okay, starting with Heath down the left side. Just tell us. Heath, oh, that's right. Heath has a Heath Chazanoff has a board meeting tonight. He's not here tonight. Sherry?
Sherry Kioski, principal of Caesar Rodney High School.
All right, how about Stacy Clark?
Stacy Clark, Director of Instruction and Student Services at First State Military.
Natasha Rivera, Transportation Supervisor, Seaford School District.
Newcastle County Tech School District.
Christine Bewley, Manager of Information Systems for the Red Clay Consolidated School District, representing technology.
Liaga Wright, Indian River School District Board Member.
Mary Nash Wilson with the Office of Management and Budget.
Jeff Tashner, Executive Director, Delaware State Education Association.
Mike Williams, Delaware State PTA and a parent.
This is Dave Sokola, State Senator. I believe Earl Jakes and the House are in session right now, so I'll skip him. State Senator, 8th District, and Bond Bill Co-Chair.
And I don't think we have Senator Lawson yet either.
No, okay. All right, I was talking and I was muted, so. Next slide, please. All right, just to review some of our ground rules, everyone has a voice. We respect all opinions. We definitely value the perspectives and the experience that the people on this group have. We know many of the folks on here also hear from different constituencies throughout the week, bringing things to us to consider. Also, we know that there are lots of folks who could not we could not include here because just the size of a committee. So again, we really encourage you to give your comments via the reopening email and the phone, so that the phone line, so that we can capture your thoughts. We want you to stay focused, be succinct, use the hand raise, and we know we're going to have to compromise on some things. Next, please. Next slide starts with public comment is welcome. Again, gives the email and the voicemail. We do transcribe all of the ideas, and we put those on the website. All right, we're looking for slide number 6.
Chuck, there might be a delay as it comes through to you because slide 6 is up.
Oh, okay. And maybe it's my connection here at home. Sorry about that.
No worries.
So you see, everything's going to be posted on our reopening page, and we do get communication from folks who do look at that page and say, hey, have you considered this? Have you considered that? In order for it to be an official public comment, it needs to come through the email that's displayed now, the voicemail. So we definitely appreciate that. Okay, next slide, and it's Oliver's turn.
So as a review for our purpose, it is to deliver a high quality framework for the Secretary of Education that includes public health considerations to help superintendents, charter leads, and principals in their planning work. This committee will not make recommendations about whether schools should open for in-person instruction. That is a decision to be made by the governor and the public health experts. Next slide, please. This framework will include recommendations on what needs to be done. The how details are outside of our scope. However, your comments and public comments will be available to those making the how decisions. We will be responsible for reviewing the scenario-based planning document in the context of operations and services. The planning documents are not set in stone and meant to be edited to meet the needs of what we do here in Delaware. Next slide. As a review on our timeline, we had 2 meetings already, June 4th to discuss scenario 1, June 11th, where we started the scenario 2 discussion, and today's meeting is the 3rd meeting, which is June 18th, to finish discussing scenario 2. We'll move to next week, which will be our 4th meeting on the 25th to discuss scenario number 3, which is substantial spread, and then on our July 2nd meeting, we will finalize our recommendations. Before each meeting, we'll read the scenario materials and make the public comments and take that into consideration as we deliberate. Next slide.
So what we'll do now is we'll take maybe 20 minutes to review, take a look at the clock here, to review what we did the last couple meetings. So we have some things that we changed or added last meeting dealing with minimal spread, and those are on this slide and the next one. So take a brief minute to look at this. And the next one. So, unless somebody has something particular they want to say about these, we'll go on to review this week, which is what we did last week. Part of this process is going to include looking at a draft of all of these recommendations to date. Our last meeting, our 5th meeting that we have in early July, is when we're going to solidify what our recommendations are to the secretary as a committee. So, before that, we hope to give you a nice tidy package with all of these. And looking at that from a high level view, we'll be able to say, should something come off the list? Do we really forget anything? Is something need to be reclassified? We'll see these again. Next slide, please. Slide 12, moderate spread. Okay, I'm seeing it now. So let's take this next 15-20 minutes and talk about, or take a look at what we did last week to
It looks like we lost Chuck there. He'll be back in a second when he gets his connectivity back.
All right, so while he's out, I'll step in. Let's take a few minutes to look at what we did last week, starting with facilities. And these are the things that we discussed. Next slide, please. Some more of the things that we discussed on facilities. Next slide, please. Additional facilities items. Next slide. These are the beginning of our discussion on transportation. We had a lot of good input from Natasha on the transportation side of it. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide, please.
And it looks like we just got Chuck back.
Yep.
Welcome back, Chuck. I didn't mess up the meeting.
You did great. You did great. I could hear you, but you couldn't see me. We had to shut some things down here.
So these are all the things that we discussed on facilities and transportation. If we can now go back to the beginning of that, and I will, Chuck, moderate whether we need to change, add, make sure we captured things correctly from the conversation, and we'll open it up to the committee for discussion.
How far back did you want to go? All the way back to facilities, moderate spread?
Yes, please.
There we go.
Do we have any hands at this point?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Now we got quite an extensive list of ads last time, so we might be okay. And as we know, this committee overlaps a lot with the health and wellness. So I'm sure that when the time comes to blend this all into a recommendations document, some of this might bleed over into their area. All right, any hands yet?
Nope, not yet.
Okay.
And this is the last facility slide. So this next one takes us back over to transportation.
So keep on moving. If we don't see a hand by the time you hit slide 19, then we'll turn it over to Andrew.
All right.
All right, Natasha, you did a lot of great work last week.
Oh, there we go. We have a hand. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I messed things up. Just with this, with this slide right here, I know we had a lot of discussion around where it says consider keeping windows open while the vehicle is in motion. And there was a number of topics on that with regards to weather conditions, not allowing that. I believe there was some discussion about the virus itself and it being circulated with airflow. So I don't know if that's something we're looking to keep in there or if there's more discussion to be had on that.
Okay. Made a note on that. That is thing. Let's see. We'll definitely have to see if the transportation world out there has a recommendation on that, because I think you're right, that was mentioned last meeting. So maybe we didn't capture it here in our revision.
I think it's a valid concern about the weather and also the way the virus spreads. And there was also discussion about our special needs students who will also need air conditioning and addressing the air conditioning systems on the bus and how that affects circulation and the flow. I think the issue here is we're looking at it globally and trying to throw out all types of ideas for consideration. Recognizing that a lot of them may not be feasible, but at least we went over it and talked about it and discussed it. And then again, the implementers, the people who are making decisions on how, will at least have something to refer back to jog their memories and say, oh yeah, maybe that's not a good idea. So I think it's good to have that conversation and have it here in our documents.
Agreed.
Gerald wanted to make a comment.
Okay.
I want to make a comment in terms of transportation when we talked about the availability of bus drivers. We know that there's a shortage right now of bus drivers. How can we create a system to help speed up the number of drivers that's available in the pipeline? Because there's some bureaucracy maybe at motor vehicle, and how can we speed it up to get more drivers in the pipeline? Because we know there's a shortage now. There will definitely be a shortage in this situation.
Yep. So
Yeah.
go ahead.
I agree with you that is something that we would like. I think that really is one of those things that is out of our control because that's federal guidelines on how CDLs are administered. So to the extent that we can do things on the state side, I am aware that there is epilogue language circulating to allow for the regulatory flexibility that we were thinking about for all aspects of working with COVID-19. I don't know how far it can reach when it comes to federal guidelines for licensing of bus drivers. But that is something that we can keep on our radar and see if there's something that can be done when we make our recommendations.
So a recommendation could be that we work on that somebody would work on reducing barriers or roadblocks to licensing drivers. Yep.
Correct.
If we don't ask the question, we don't get the result. So I think it's worth exploring. Any other hands for the review of our last week's work? Okay, if not, let's move on to slide 19 with Andrew.
Yeah, so a very quick reminder for folks of what the minimal to moderate community spread scenario is. It basically means there's a significant amount of virus circulating in the local community. It means that in-person instruction could be impacted depending on the exact level of community spread, and it corresponds with phase 1 to 2 of the Delaware reopening plan generally. Next slide. And so, the things that we began to talk about last week relative to facilities and transportation certainly apply to operations and technology. Many of the things on this slide are public health focused, but as Chuck just mentioned, certainly inform the work of operations and technology. I'll turn it back to you now, Chuck.
Let's see, next slide, please. This situation could involve short-term dismissals if we have a flare-up in the virus. We have that old statement at the bottom. School operation is situation dependent. It may be everybody's doing the same thing. It may be depending on if there's a part of the state that has more infection or more spread. They might have intermittent closures. So that's what this scenario entails. Next slide, please. So over the course of our discussion on operations and on technology, we want to consider these questions. What should be added to this list of essential actions? Should any essential actions be deprioritized? And should any of the actions be reordered or moved to a different slide or to a different scenario? So all of those are fair game. So let's go ahead and start with operations. So Oliver, would you take it from here?
Thanks, Chuck. So operations is dealing with the budget, food, enrollment, staffing, all of those things that go behind making things work. And this is the now items that we had talked about. We talked about preparing to implement distance learning programs, prepare and implement distance hiring, evaluation, and other human resource programs, using disposable plates and utensils in the child nutrition area, and based on public health guidance, marking spaces in the cafeteria and serving lines to help with social distancing. Also having designated entrances and exits, for flow. Based on public health guidelines, also build procedures to conduct cleaning of cafeterias and in the high touch areas throughout the day. Next slide. We also need to think about developing a cafeteria serving model. For instance, in some schools now, they do serve meals in classrooms. So that is something that needs to be considered. Serving meals in the cafeterias with spaced serving lines, spaced seating, longer meal periods, or staggered meal delivery, considering prepackaged or box lunches. This is a real critical area for the child nutrition area. And a little anecdote here is that I know, at least with my school district, they have a huge menu of things that they do every week for food. This is an area where the cafeteria staff may need to look at those things that are easy to package and probably less options for students, but enough to make sure we meet the daily meal requirements that they have, so that we can get them fed in an efficient manner and try to adhere to some of the social distancing things that are out there. Next slide, please. So if schools are instructed to close, we'll ensure continuity of essential operations. That means school districts will have to consider if they continue a grab and go similar to what's happening now while we're out of school, to serve students who are at home. If the school's open, then we would following school reopening guidelines from scenario 1. Next slide. Technology, I'll turn that over to you, Chuck.
Okay, before we do, let's talk about operations and see what reactions our committee has to the draft that was put here. I do want to go ahead and start with one. I think it came up in the previous scenario, but talking about our state unit count process. We know that when you talk about budget and enrollment, unit count it drives funding up and down the state, not only for districts but for charter schools. So unit count is based on attendance in a certain range of days in September. So we just have to make sure that we understand if there might be intermittent closures, what does that mean for our definition of attendance? If we're remote at the time that the unit count is taken, what does it mean for attendance? And then what does it mean if students are not able to attend in person, those special education evaluations that we know need to happen? What does it mean for the unit count? So the recommendation that I'll add to the list is that I'll write it as a recommendation, but I just wanted to throw that out there.
You're exactly right. The unit count process is like the big driver for everything when it comes to the finances for school districts. So to the extent that that's being considered when the decisions are being made and having that regulatory flexibility that we discussed, that will help us make sure that we have the resources allocated towards being able to come back and teach effectively.
Chuck, we have two hands. We have Jeff and then Sherry.
Okay.
Chuck, before I address operations, I had a late arriving thought on the transportation that was generated by Gerald's remarks. And I don't know the extent to which it's feasible or not, but I am sure that someone could inquire whether DMV could identify a list of all CDL holders in Delaware. And it may be in everybody's best interest, if that can be done, to do outreach to them now about the possible need for school bus drivers and solicit whether there would be any interest. We know that the availability of drivers is a problem. And with the likelihood that we're going to have, 72-person buses down to possibly 24 passenger, we should probably be doing some active outreach. And again, DMV, you'd have to talk to them and they'd have to let you know whether there's any federal law limitations or not. But they clearly would have the ability to tell you who in Delaware holds a CDL license. Pivoting to the operations, one thing that I heard in the last two nights that kind of struck me, and we would need it either in periods of short-term dismissal or transition to remote learning, or in remote learning, is the idea that kids need resources. And last night it was talked about in terms of consumables, non-consumables, not just textbooks. You may have 30 of them in a classroom and kids come use them and then they rotate classes, but also throughout the process, things you take for granted, pencil, papers, all that sort of stuff. So it would probably be smart to prepare ahead of time to have educators and districts identify if we have to go from in-person to a moderate community spread situation where we're having short-term dismissals, and or if we're going to remote learning, what are the consumables we'd normally be giving kids at home that we can't give them, that they'll need at home? I mean, in school, that they'll need at home. Do we have them readily available, and how do we deliver them? So I think about this year where we were in school on March 13th, people went home for a weekend and they never went back. And the difficulty in making sure that kids had the consumables and just the support and the resources. And this really came through last night with the academics and equity work group. So I thought, from our perspective of planning and operations, there really should be a suggestion to districts that they make some sort of assessment of the need and have a plan prepared that if this scenario does arise, we can distribute those things to kids so that even if they're at home, they're capable of doing what we need them to do. So that's it for me for right now.
Thank you. Next hand.
Sherry?
Looking at bullet number 2 that talks about hiring, evaluation, and other HR protocols, I'm going to kind of reiterate and stress the need for some flexibility with hiring. You know, I've lived both worlds at like the elementary level and the secondary level. We are universally kind of in a teacher shortage right now. This becomes especially important in like critical needs areas. Like right now, I have an opening in my building for a special ed teacher to work in a TAM setting for Algebra 1. And it's the expectation because of certification, I have to hire someone who's highly qualified in math. There are some special ed candidates out there with some really strong resumes that I can't talk to an interview because of current certification rules. And I think that this is only going to become more of a stressor as we get closer to school, or if we see that people can't return to their current position or they opt not to return because of sort of the protocols that are in place. So I think we really need to be as flexible as possible with the ability to hire this coming school year. And I know that the evaluation protocol became a real stressor for both teachers and admin this past spring when we were kind of in this very uncertain period of what we were supposed to do. And if something happens and we spike and we're out, and it's when people are supposed to be doing goal setting, or it's when people are supposed to be doing the formative, I think we need to be given some flexibility and some breathing room as far as schools are concerned, because I think the priority becomes teachers teaching and kids learning and not checking a box, so to speak.
Thanks. What does flexibility and breathing room look like? If we were to point to some things to give flexibility on in particular, what kinds of things are you thinking?
Well, I know that one of the things that kind of came into play, like with new hires and maybe not having the number of evaluations that kind of came into play, if they were on the initial license, like that was something that was questioned. Or if, like, let's say we spike potentially in September, October, and that's right the time that people would have been doing sort of some goal setting pieces because of whatever it is that they're teaching. I think some flexibility with timing and deadlines is going to become imperative to meet the needs of both the admin and the teacher. We had situations where people were kind of, say the formative evaluation had happened the few days prior to March 13th. The teacher and the admin had their post-observation conference scheduled for sometime the week of March 16th, and then we were kind of hanging out there. So I just think providing some flexibility as much as possible on the part of the teacher and on the part of the admin to just kind of make some stuff work is going to be imperative, because the important part about that process is sort of the conversation. And I just don't want people to get hung up on the semantics of the timeline. If something happens and we are out of school and things are beyond anyone's control.
Thanks. Any other hands?
Yes, Christine.
Okay.
So I really appreciate Sherry's comments, because when I was reading this, the first 2 bullets seem pretty vague to me, like prepare to implement distance learning programs, but it's not very detailed as to what we're looking to implement. So my comment is, I feel like that first bullet's a little vague. We might be able to add something to it. And the second one, I mean, she kind of detailed that one out really well. And then my last comment on this slide is, if this is a do now, that third bullet about using disposable plates and utensils doesn't really fit here. I think that should be moved to slide 24.
Might have been my copy and paste error. Sorry about that. That one we can remove. Well, I don't know. Maybe let's talk about it. Does it need to be here? Okay. Any other hands?
Not right now.
I'll make a note that bullet 3 looks a little out of place. Okay, we'll give it another few seconds to see if anybody wants to comment on operations, which includes budget, food, enrollment, and staffing. Okay, let's move on to slide, the technology slide, which is 26, the first one.
Actually, Chuck, before you go to that, as you read the list of groups, I think it goes without saying, and my current job as being the budget director for the district, maybe we need to put a bullet in there to recommend that, there's a planning meeting with the chief financial officer to understand the resources available to make some of these things happen, and start planning on where money can be moved around and allocated to meet some of this demand, because it's a different demand than what we're normally used to. So maybe we should have a bullet to specifically say you need to meet with your budget people, because the budget directors and business managers know kind of all the strings that are attached to the money that we currently have available to us, and that may or may not inhibit implementing some of these things.
Right, and that even includes additional resources that are available, such as the CARES Act money.
CARES Act, and then, for some reason, procurement just seems to be a big issue that I keep thinking about. Not so much, I think the thresholds might be fine, but then there's other rules that are there that may need to be looked at when it comes to purchasing. And I think the supply chain for some of the things we need is going to be an issue.
All right, so technology, slide 26 is due now. Before we go through technology, so when we put our slides together, I'll do a brief meeting with Andrew and Oliver. We take a look at the slides, and we noticed that there wasn't much originally in the technology section. So what we did is we took the stuff from scenario 1 and copied it over to scenario 2, knowing that it's probably not going to be exactly a correct fit, but at least to have some things to start to talk about. So I anticipate that there'll be a lot of, well, this doesn't belong here, or it needs to be done a different way, or needs to be moved to different time frame. So don't be shy about telling us to move something or delete something. Rather than giving you a slide that just, says consider stuff from scenario 1 or ensure this, we wanted to give you something to throw against the wall and pressure test, as Andrew likes to say. So take a look at slide 26, technology due now, and please give us some feedback on that slide.
We've got Christine's hand up.
Christine, good. I was hoping that she would. Go ahead, Christine.
Sorry, you ready? There were a lot of technology slides here, and I actually have a lot of recommendations on where to move things and how to reword things. So when we're looking at the due nows for technology, the first bullet I'm good with. The second bullet, like identify or inventory internet access options for each student during registration and back to school intake. I think we should strike the during registration and back to school intake paperwork, because we could be doing that now. A lot of our districts are currently sending out surveys to students. That's something that we can start gathering now so we can get prepared for back to school. And then that last sentence about the school-based internet accessibility rosters, I'm good with leaving that there. For bullets 3 and 4, my recommendation would be to strike both of those, and I have some recommendations that I would like to add to the technology due nows.
Okay.
So I'm going to read my notes. Develop a district plan that includes a learning management system or an LMS and guidance for schools. Include training and support for teachers to adapt remote learning skills for the classroom. So the state of Delaware offers Schoology, and a lot of the districts take advantage of that, which is an LMS, but that, I mean, it could be Google Classroom, it could be another LMS that districts or charters might be using, but at least if they develop a plan to use an LMS, it'll be a great way for teachers to push those classes and courses and assignments and relay with their students back and forth. To designate, the next bullet would be designate a single point of contact in each school to plan and communicate with the district technology lead. So this is going back to kind of the phase one that I would like to, you know, if I have time to go back and relook at and reword some of that. I think as the more I've thought about it over the weeks, a single point of contact might be later on, but I think I would like to move it to this slide. Identify a device leader for each school, considering providing additional support with other staff or volunteers. So that's just a rewording of another bullet on here. And then this is something we haven't talked about yet, but another bullet to add is identify a district remote meeting platform. So right now we're on WebEx. A lot of districts have been using Zoom. Zoom had offered free up until I think this month, and I think they're going to start charging for it. So districts and charters need to start identifying what they will use if we need to go back into a remote session and start because it's going to cost money. And then start creating some parent guidance on online learning platforms and access, so that if we do go remote, we're ready to distribute some documentation to parents on how to access it, you know, student usernames, passwords, and some simple directions. On this slide, we talked about this a couple of minutes ago, develop a parent technology support plan and publish that on the internet. And that takes place of one of these other bullets, which talks about putting a person out, but I think we should put the support plan out, not necessarily a person. And then the team of folks that's referenced later on these slides, I think we should move here. And my recommendation is establish a device team consisting of a school communication lead, a device lead, the technology infrastructure lead, and a device repair technician. I think it's referred to as like vendor management leader. And I think that should be more of like a device repair technician. I think people will relate to that terminology a little bit better. And then, like I said, I would get rid of bullet 3 and 4 on this slide.
Thank you. Thank you. Hey, a question about we have mobile hotspots on here. Has there been any success with enabled tablets?
I'm sorry, what was that?
You're muted. We have mobile hotspots on here, but are there other options like data enabled tablets or something besides hotspots that could take advantage of cell technologies?
Yep. I mean, if the schools aren't own them, that'd be a fantastic option for some students.
Excellent. Thanks, Christine. Any other hands on this one?
Yes, Stacy.
Okay.
Hi, since we've redesigned all the slides, which thank you for that. I'm not sure where this exactly would fit in, but I think one of the things we need to remember to put in there is developing some of the policies and protocols for online learning and the meetings, an acceptable use for vendor contracts, mental health, counseling, teacher class meetings, things like that, because that is different than how we have done it in the past. And if it's online, I think we need to make sure that we're developing things. Example, Seesaw was something a lot of younger students were using with their classes, and some, not at my school, but I heard this from several, some posted the reading level of students, and it was open. So every classroom's students' reading level was out there for all other families to see. I think that should be something that's looked at as not appropriate for sharing. So there's some other, you know, how you're going to do mental health, how they're going to do just even school counseling and things like that.
Thanks. Any other hands?
That's it for hands for right now.
Okay. Next slide, please.
Christine has some comments for this slide.
I was hoping so. So this one is if schools are instructed to close. And so go ahead, Christine.
Okay, so if schools are instructed to close, deploy devices and move to a virtual, maybe slash remote learning environment. I think remote learning is a lot of the terminology that has been used in the state that I've heard, but feel free for anybody to comment on that. My recommendation is to take out that whole second bullet because if they're closed, we won't be collecting any devices. So I think that's just in the wrong spot there. And the last bullet, I want to add on this one, if using family-owned devices, distribute parent guidance on online learning platforms and access. So where we're creating it on slide 26, we would then distribute it if we close here. And add here, ensure parents know the technology support plan. So when we distribute that guidance, also make sure that they know where to locate that support plan. And then to reword that last bullet there to say compile and distribute list of school and community access locations and list of local home service providers, Comcast, Verizon, et cetera.
Good stuff. Any other hands for if schools are instructed to close during the moderate spread scenario?
I like all of those suggestions. And I think it goes without saying that we need to also be considering our special ed and special needs students. I know that's more of an equity and a different committee than ours, but it keeps, from an operational standpoint, I'm always thinking about, okay, what is that population going to need? And from what I've heard and also having a special needs child, it seems that the remote learning and opportunities to address their related services needs were not taken care of as well as they could have been. And so I would hope that we would make some kind of recommendation that we need to focus on that and improving in that area. But again, that may not be our committee, but as a budget manager, we always look at how we allocate resources for all different types of students in the school. So I just wanted to make that point.
Thanks.
We have Sherry with her hand up.
Okay, Sherry.
I just think one of the things we also need to be mindful of is if there is a need for translation services for the tech hotline, depending on the different language needs of a district, making sure that someone is accessible or at least is able to kind of call back and support a family.
Thank you. Any other hands on this one?
Nope. We're good.
I wonder if maybe I messed up copy and paste on this stuff. We'll keep going, and I'm sure Christine will set us straight. Okay, next, next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 slides, it looks like, is when schools reopen. So Alyssa, if you would just spend a few seconds, just enough time for the committee and the public to gloss over each slide. And then when you're done, go back to the, it looks like slide 28. Okay, what hands do we have?
We have Christine's hand and then Sherry's.
Okay, let's go with Christine.
Okay, so this is where I said I had moved a lot of the items up to where, like up into the do now into the slide 26. So most of these I had taken care of. So my recommendation would be to get rid of this slide completely.
Okay. That's 28.
That was 28 and actually 29 as well.
29. Why don't you just go down your whole list, if you would?
Okay, so 28, 29, I would remove slide 30, Alyssa, that I lost here. So this is when we reopen. So it depends on if you are in a one-to-one model that the students would keep their devices, or if they go back into like a shared pool of devices for the school. So developing a district-wide procedure for return and inventory of district-owned devices. I could say for our case, the sixth grader would bring their device back. So I wouldn't necessarily be collecting it, but if you are collecting it to safely bag it, yes. I don't know that bullet 2 is needed to transport them to a central location. I think that would be up to the plan itself. So I don't know that we would make that as a recommendation. And then sanitize the device if it's going to be going out to another student. And then the fourth and fifth bullets wouldn't pertain to this. That was, from the do now, from kind of where we are now to assess devices for the spring. So that doesn't really fit here. So I would take those 2 bullets out. And if we collected them, we'd want to do the maintenance. But I think what we need to add on here is if school does reopen, we need to limit shared devices, labs, tablets, smart boards, to limit the touching of multiple devices by students, and then follow the cleaning procedures after student use. That's 30. I have a couple more if you want me to keep going. So 31, this is more of a do now than a when school reopens. So now we would want to be identifying an asset tracking tool, vendors or contractors to assist with devices on such this really isn't when school reopens. Or some other areas. And then slide 32, and then I'm done with my notes. So bullets 1 and 2, this is when school reopens. I don't know that we'd be compiling technology-facing lessons learned for inclusion in the districts. This, I think, is almost a do now as well, and that's where I'll lean on more of our instructional folks, Stacy or Sherry, if they have some feedback on that first bullet there. And number 2, I think it's the same. I don't know that would necessarily only when school reopens. I would take the third one out. The infrastructure, we've covered that previously. And number 4, I'm fine. Bullet number 4, I'm good with. Use our history to make sure as we go forward, we're in a good place. They are all my comments.
All right, thank you. I believe Sherry's next.
One of the things that, is definitely an emphasis in our CTE pathways is that students have an early career experience or some type of capstone. Our school, any student that kind of goes through the AP computer science pathway or the business information systems pathway kind of has the option of being on a tech squad their senior year, and they have been invaluable to us as we've been in the building helping with a variety of some basic technical tasks, whether helping teachers or helping fellow students, working on Chromebook carts and things like that. One of the things I did discuss with the teachers that teach those pathways is that if we were ever in this position again next year, could those students help man a tech hotline to answer some basic questions? So I do think in some cases, those kids that have gone through a tech pathway that definitely have an interest in some of these things might be an untapped resource to help support families and things with some basic issues. And I think that we might want to consider kind of bringing them into the fold.
It's a good recommendation. Consider using tech pathway students to staff tech hotline support technology. Do we have any more hands at this point, Alyssa?
We do not.
Okay.
Yes, we do. Oliver has his hand up, and then Stacy.
Okay. Oliver.
Mine can probably wait. It's not about technology. But I'm sitting here thinking about all of these things that we're talking about from an operational standpoint. And I seem to recall that part of our charge was athletics. I don't think we've mentioned anything about athletics specifically on how to deal with those issues. And the reason I bring it up is I got a phone call today asking about soccer team and them wanting to do concessions when they come back. And so I know this is all dictated on whatever guidance comes from the governor, but we don't have any guidance in here on how to deal with athletics and facilities use. With the public being able to come into the building right now, we're just focused on getting kids back to school, but a lot of us use our buildings for public use. And especially in the summer for sports activities and things of that nature, but we haven't mentioned anything in here, and I'm not sure if we should or if we shouldn't, but it just toss that out there for thought.
Ask Andrew, because I know that when we were talking originally about the scope of each committee, there was some brief discussion about athletics being in this group, but I think it landed somewhere else. But Andrew, do you recall?
Yeah, I believe it lives with wellness, and in many reasons because Mike Rodriguez is responsible for athletics. And he is one of the co-chairs of that committee.
But concessions and so forth and building use, that like the utilization of rental facility rental, that does live here. So if you have something that we forgot, we can go and pick that back up. All right, who is our next hand?
Stacy.
Stacy.
Thanks. So I just want to say, throughout all of this, we do have to remember, again, I'm not in Sussex County, but Sussex County and some of the other places don't have access to Wi-Fi or any of that. So I think with this, we also need to think of, some of these schools may not be handing out much technology. And out of the box a little bit, I know the state is working with public broadcasting. So that should be something to write down as a consideration for whatever reason, and that may be more engaging for some of the younger students as well, but using it through whatever public broadcasting or having the teachers do things. A lot of people have DVD players, even if they're old, and they may not have technology, but if teachers are recording lessons and somehow making DVDs, somehow dispersing those in a similar way that we are doing with computers is another thing to look at that's a little more out of the box, but may assist with no technology in that same regard. Or DVD players, you can, find them other places and buy some of those. Cheaper than a computer.
All right.
That's it. Thank you.
One thing I noted when going through even the headings on this, when school reopened, do now, what's the other one? If schools are instructed to close, is so one of the situations that scares me as an operations type person is, what would happen if there is some decision made to do some students at school and some students at home. I think we've all said that it's difficult to see how having a bus that's less than half capacity run around and bring kids to and from school. What do you do with the other students, or do you double up runs and so forth? But with technology, we were supposed to come up with kind of like what if recommendations. Are there any technology recommendations that we can think of that would apply if, say, there's say teachers have to teach a class that is partially in person and partially at home. Again, it's a scary proposal, or not proposal, but scary to think about. But anything like that, where some of these situations we've heard about, or scenarios, if they were to come to be, and we were to tell our technology people, make it happen, are there any recommendations that we can think about, or things to consider in such a situation?
I think one of the things to think about in that hybrid situation, where part students are in school and part are not in school, is again repurposing existing staff. We have a lot of para educators in classrooms and things like that. So I'm thinking, how would a teacher actually split their time? They'd be teaching, probably 18 hours a day, for the ones who are at home and then the ones who are there. So they'd have to split that up somehow with existing staff or additional staff, to kind of make a hybrid situation work. And I mean, because, teachers teach 188 days, this, I don't know how it would be structured without throwing some additional resources in a hybrid situation. But you're right, that is a scary situation to deal with.
Right, but we've all heard or read online somewhere where some state somewhere is thinking about that kind of thing, or having kids come in one day and then home the next, and you think about our staff and their child care situations, and just how do you instructionally serve students that way. But it's if it were to be a situation that we have to seriously consider, what technology considerations or even operational considerations would there be? I bring this up just because it seemed like a gap in our framework, and because we still have a half an hour left to discuss. So also, if somebody has another comment about the slides that we have reviewed, of course you can bring that up as well. So do we have any hands?
We have Christine and then Sherry.
Okay, Christine.
So like if you pose that to me as kind of the technology office, like what can we offer? I mean, obviously getting like webcams, like it's not going to be streaming the teacher's instruction, but I think you would kind of then land on the academic groups. Are we, to set up some type of flipped classroom or, blended learning, or can they record some assignments that the students, if they have devices at home, can watch that assignment and then discuss it the next day, or an extension of what the teacher did that day. It would be a lot more preparation on the teacher's plate to do that, but that's what I could come up with quickly, is kind of either recording stuff or working in more of that like flipped classroom, blended learning model.
So I put a recommendation to prepare to support flipped classroom and or blended learning model. So that's a potential recommendation. Right. Who's next? Was it Sherry?
I think one of the things that schools also need to be mindful of, if, again, our district is looking at the going to one-to-one, and one of the things I've brought up is I think you have to be mindful of what courses has the student registered for, and do those machines need special software? If they're in the CAD or the, robotics pathway, like, is there certain software? If they're in the digital media pathway, what is the software? Because those machines are going to need to be kind of personalized before they're distributed to kids. And I think, going back to Christine's comment, it's important to recognize that we may need to get some teachers in to record some videos. For example, my chemistry teacher, we kind of made arrangements for him to come in and do some demos, because obviously it's a lab-based course and they're not in class and they're not doing the lab, but to at least kind of have the exposure to the things that the kids need to take, knowing that that information will come into play when those kids take AP chemistry next year. So I think, again, the vertical articulation within courses has to be important. And I think if those resources and videos are available, maybe we all share, what we have, so that we're kind of working smarter, not harder. and people can kind of benefit what other people have already done.
I like your idea of the videos and thinking about that for science, and it just made me think about all the CTE courses and a lot of the hands-on things that they do that could probably be done on video as a additional cost offering.
Thank you. Any other hands at this point?
Yes, Stacy.
Stacy. Stacy, I don't know if you're unmuted.
I'm sorry. Somebody made a comment about number of days for staff and students, and I just want to comment that regulatory flexibility should be a consideration, and that includes days. Also, I think, to piggyback on sort of my DVD thing and what the other two just previously said, with recording. So, if you record something and you have a little cheapy camera and you're recording it, you can upload it if, in Schoology or some other LMS system. If the student or family has a computer to access that or good Wi-Fi to access that, if you have half the kids in the building and the other ones can attend. But I would say you need to record it. And if a student doesn't have a computer, that's where the DVD piece that I was talking about would have to come in. So you need to have DVD players, which again are cheaper than computers, but DVD players, if they don't have Wi-Fi, and then put it on a DVD versus paper, because I know some in a program I'm in, they were calling if you don't have a computer, you get a packet. And in a group that I'm in, that's a national group, they call them poverty packets. So I would like to move away from that and find a way that they are instructed equitably, all students, and in the best way that they can be. So I want us to, keep that in mind as well. And also remember that some schools are tiny and we don't have a technology person. So this is, just to make sure that, these are recommendations and not shoulda, coulda, wouldas. Thank you.
I tried to write it out as a recommendation, but I have explored alternatives to paper packets using commonly available technologies like the DVD or something else. And even a lot of game consoles, and I know people who don't have computers, but they have game consoles. That's probably not everybody, but I know they can even play DVDs and stuff like that. So it's one idea, and we'll take that down. Any other hands?
Christine.
Something that actually came up from another part of the state tech group that I'm part of is they had students who they'd given the information about like Comcast Internet Essentials because they didn't have Wi-Fi at home, which is $10 a month, and they flat out refused any Wi-Fi access to even look into it. They just didn't want it. So we need to be cognizant of those students as well, whose families are just refusing any kind of technology support. And another idea that, just to throw it out there, is we're streaming tonight. Would it be a possibility to have like one grade level teacher stream on the days when they're like on the off days, like they would be streaming lessons to all the students in first grade or something like that, that teacher would be responsible for the lessons for those kids that are at home that day. And then when they have a class in the opposite day, another teacher would be streaming to all the first grade cohorts or something like that. Just an idea to throw out there.
Your hands at this point?
Not yet.
We'll give it another minute. We talked about tonight is fair game. Technology, operations, last week's stuff. Also, I want to remind our viewers on YouTube, first I want to say thanks for coming and joining us and listening in. Just want to make sure you know about the, and we'll display it on the screen again, but in order for a public comment to be an official public comment, we're going to need an email or voicemail I do look over at the chat from time to time, and I see a lot of really good concepts and good ideas there. So please help us out and memorialize that, put it in the email, and it'll become part of our database of public comment that we make sure that everybody gets to see.
Chuck, Jeff would like to make a comment.
Yes, Jeff.
Chuck, I know we talked about it a couple weeks ago and it was referenced a little bit tonight, but I think we really need to call out districts giving thought to, if we're not in school with students, how do we provide related services, particularly to our students with special needs? You know, I'm thinking speech language pathology, you know, occupational therapy, physical therapy. How do we provide those related services when we can't do it in the traditional model, which is the student comes to school, but we have to flip it and provide it out?
Put that one down too. Plan how to provide related services. Some you can do technology assisted, some might be some other way. I know that over the summer, now that things are getting a little more relaxed, there are some opportunities for face to face. Of course, that'll take some coordination and funding, but that's a very very important thing to note. Plan how to provide related services.
And Chuck, it probably goes without saying, but as we all know, and you alluded to it a little earlier, you know, the governor keeps saying it, the virus hasn't gone away, it's out there. I was talking with a colleague in a Western state who mentioned that they had a church event, no social distancing, 100 cases came out of that single event. So no matter what status we're in, whether it's minimal, moderate, substantial, we also need to be thinking about contingencies to be able to quickly switch from one status to another. You know, part of what happened this time was that things happened in March. We transitioned out of school, and I think people did an excellent job doing something that was pretty much unanticipated and not the sort of thing that we had advanced planning for. But knowing the likelihood that what's going on is going to be our reality for the next 12 to 18 months, in addition to preparing for the state we're in, we've got to be ready to be able to adjust quickly if we're particularly going from minimum to moderate or moderate to severe spread or substantial spread. So, you know, in my mind, it's that contingency planning you have, not just for what you're doing, but for the other statuses that you may have to move into. And I didn't want that to go unrecognized in all the conversation.
Thank you. Plan contingencies to quickly transition from one scenario to another. Yep. Are there hands out there?
Yep. David would like to make a comment.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on something Oliver said earlier, and there was two really. One is on athletics, and there's getting ready. I'm going to assume within the next few weeks, going to be school's going to kind of start for athletics in that community. Hopefully, there's going to be some direction given as far as workouts on school property, because right now that's kind of hanging out there with no specific direction. I believe that's going to happen. So I did see something on the wellness group, some paperwork and some direction they gave, but it was very brief and kind of vague. But that's going to be a large area of concern operationally. Custodial staff, everyone will be involved on that. And so school will kind of open for them right now. And that's going to happen within the next couple of weeks, unless the information I have is wrong. And the other one is kind of out of left field, and that's driver's ed people. It's kind of in the technology department and where they go. You've got a lot of 16-year-olds and some 15s coming up in the following school year, kind of waiting to see when do we get in the car with someone. And there's not only so much technology you can do there. There are simulation devices. Some of the instructional people in the state have developed programs to drive without an instructor in the car on driving ranges. So we're being as creative as we can. But at some point, the student needs to get in the car with a driving instructor. So any kind of technology that would assist with preparation for those folks, I'm not sure how it fits in what I've been reading on these pages and these bullets, but it may slip in there also as something to be concerned with.
Thank you. Thank you. Even just another thought. I know this probably isn't practical, but even in driver ed, you never see the driver ed teacher going out with just one student. It's usually two students, and it's probably a protocol or SOP or something like that. But they go out in these little cars, and do we need an SUV or something with 3 rows in order to make it work? It's just another side thing. So, do we have any other hands at this point?
Well, and just to add on to that driver's ed thing, because I've had that come up also, is maybe there's an opportunity to switch that to a program where parents can help do the driver training with some assistance, and them train the kids in their own car, maybe. Just a thought.
Thank you. Any other hands?
Not at this moment.
Okay. Well, we'll give it just a few more seconds here.
Stacy, did you just put your hand back up?
I did, yes. Thank you. Just want to put on there for streaming, and just to make sure that the capacity, if that's the way somebody wants to go, that can handle the capacity. I know somebody mentioned thumb drives being dropped off, for buses at one of the comments. So that would be an idea too, but you would need to order thumb drives and order DVDs, order, little mini cameras or whatever to be able to record, or if you're streaming, which is going to be an issue for those that don't have great Wi-Fi. But also to remember staff with the Wi-Fi, some staff may not have good Wi-Fi access either. And if we're all home, that happened with a number of them. So just keeping that, not to forget.
Thanks. One of the things that I think of when I think of streaming is if you have a lot of people trying to stream and they're in a school and they're trying to stream out. What does that bandwidth at the school look like, especially in some of our more rural schools? I mean, I know in places where there's a fiber backbone, it might not be a big issue, but some places still don't have really robust internet access to the school that I'm aware of. Although, Christine, you and your folks might have a different perspective now. I haven't been a technology director for some years, but I know that there was a time when that was a concern.
I mean, at the school level, it's been much better. I mean, I'm going on public record. I can't say that streaming to March Madness is not an issue, because it usually is. You could always tell certain times a year when streaming gets advanced. But I think DTI has done a pretty good job of at least getting all the school buildings up to a pretty good capacity. There may be a few schools left, but most of them are pretty good, at least at the school level. But the streaming would be an issue if people don't have strong Wi-Fi at home.
All right, any hands?
Not at the moment.
Okay, let's go on to slide 33. And still open it. If you see a hand go up, Alyssa, let us know. We're still taking comments from the committee. But I just want to talk about our next steps. Next meeting is next Thursday, June 25th, 5 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. We're going to talk about scenario 3, significant community spread. That's the main topic of discussion. We will give a read ahead as soon as we have it from the draft from our document. Actually, I think I might have that already. I'll have to go take a look. I'll get that to the committee as soon as I can, and I'll get it on slides and get it so that the public can access it as soon as I can. We will take all the feedback from this meeting and update the draft essential actions and reshare it with the group in advance of our next meeting. So next meeting, we'll also talk about all of the changes that we made this meeting. So it'll be a similar format to what we've done the last couple nights. Public comment will be still accepted via email at reopeningideas@doe.k12.de.us or voicemail at 302-735-4244. And all of those voicemails are transcribed, and we do share them we try to share them every Friday. I don't know if our transcribers are going to get it out tomorrow, because I don't know that they'll be at work tomorrow, but if it doesn't come out tomorrow, then we should see it Monday. All right. Any other comments? Any other hands up?
Nope, not yet.
If none, let's go to slide 34. Thank you. Stay well. And again, to all of you out there watching us on YouTube, thank you for stopping by, and we'll see you next week. The meeting is adjourned for the night.